in today's episode of Myths and Monsters, we're going to be talking about a bizarre mutilated cow incident, we're going to be talking about some possible Sasquatch migration routes, and we're also going to be looking into some weird spiritual legends surrounding the Northern Lights. So definitely get ready to get your spook on because we're about to dive right in. So back in 2006, there was actually a Sasquatch sighting north of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. If you aren't aware, Saskatchewan is known as a prairie province, which means there's a lot of flat land for farmers to grow grain. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that there are actually a lot of hilly areas and forest areas in Saskatchewan. It's just not mainly that, like it's mostly flat land, but there definitely are some forestry type areas. This Sasquatch sighting actually happened in Torch River, Saskatchewan, which is one of the more forestry areas. They actually have a provincial forestry park there, so it definitely has a lot more trees than some of the other areas in Saskatchewan. So the woman who saw this Sasquatch gave a pretty typical description. She saw a tall, hairy figure walking upright by the highway. Now there's been a lot of speculation through the years that maybe all these Sasquatch sightings are actually bears, because bears can walk upright for short distances, and obviously they have very similar appearances to the Sasquatch. They're both hairy, they're both tall. You get the picture. A lot of the people though who have claimed to see a Sasquatch say like, no, this was not a bear, I know what a bear looks like, it is nothing like that. They usually say that the Sasquatch doesn't have ears or a long snout like a bear does, and that it basically looks just like a human except hairier. And now again, you could always make the argument that like if you're alone and you see this tall, hairy figure by the woods, like your brain is going to be scared and try and rationalize it any way it can. And to you, if you don't think it looks like a bear, you could always rationalize it as, oh, it's a Sasquatch, like that's what it has to be, it's the only thing that looks like. So there's always going to be that argument that like when in fear you see something that you're not quite sure what it is, your brain will make a connection for you. I'm not saying that this was or wasn't a Sasquatch, I'm just kind of giving all the facts that I've found for you guys to make your own decision. However, what did catch my eye about these stories that I was reading is in 2009, so 3 years after the Sasquatch sighting, there was this really bizarre cow mutilation. All of the cuts in it were very smooth, not like that of an animal. There were carved chunks out of the cow, and half of its face was actually missing. So this was not a typical attack by any sort of animal predator. Usually animal attacks are a bit messier, not so like clean cut. Now at first I didn't really see any sort of connection because the Sasquatch sighting was at Deschambault Lake. I'll put it down here because I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that, which is about 450 kilometers away from Saskatoon, and that's about a 4.5–5 hour drive, so I just didn't really see a connection there. But when I started looking deeper into the story, I actually found that the Sasquatch sighting was at Torch River, which is only 230 kilometers away from Saskatoon, which is about like a 2.5 hour drive. Now the reason the distance is so important is because whenever animals travel, it's always weight versus distance, and that will give you the energy cost for that animal for that amount of distance. So for example, a coyote can travel a lot farther than a bear can travel because it weighs so much less, so it takes less energy for that coyote to travel that distance. It's actually not unusual for coyotes to travel up to 600 kilometers just to find more food. Now since the Sasquatch has a very bear-like appearance and lives in the same sort of environment as a bear, I thought I would do a little bit more research on how far bears can travel. Now there are a few factors that can go into this. Female bears travel less than male bears because females usually have cubs with them or have to stay a certain distance to the cubs to make sure that it can bring them back food and keep them protected. But male bears don't really have that sort of strings attached, so they can travel farther than female bears. But On average, male bears only travel about 26 kilometers to look for food. So at first I was a little bummed out and didn't really see a connection there either until I kept looking, and it was actually recorded in a research paper from Minnesota from 1981 to 1990. They conducted a research on how far bears travel, and they actually recorded one of the longest distances found that a bear has traveled, and it was 168 kilometers. Now that is a lot closer to 230 kilometers than the original 26 kilometers. So it's actually not that far off that a Sasquatch would travel 230 kilometers for a better food source, or maybe its environment is shrinking. So the cow mutilation could have actually been from a Sasquatch migrating, or maybe that's its territory, or it could have just been a regular bear that someone mistook for a Sasquatch.
So I just wanted to quickly come on here and explain why the distance was so important again, because I don't think it was fully explained in the previous videos. So the cow mutilation happened in Saskatoon, and I initially thought that the Sasquatch sighting was at Dishambalt Lake, which is 530 kilometers. Now, the closest animal that I could compare a Sasquatch to is a bear, because they're very similar in size and appearance, and so it was just the logical choice for me. And the farthest that a bear has traveled on record is 168 kilometers, so the difference between 530 kilometers and 168 was just too much to be like, oh, there's a connection there. But once I found out that the Sasquatch had actually been sighted in Torch River, that's only 230 kilometers away from Saskatoon, where the cow mutilation happened, it's not out of the question to assume that a Sasquatch would travel to Saskatoon for more food if it couldn't find anywhere it was. So the cow mutilation could have been caused by the Sasquatch that was sighted in Torch River. I don't think that was completely explained when I said it previously, so I hope this makes it a little bit more clear, and if not, don't be afraid to leave me any comments in the comment section below, and I will answer those for you.
I don't know if we'll ever really know the truth of if a Sasquatch exists, or if it's just bears, or what, but I just thought this story was interesting, and I thought I would give you guys my little theory on it. So a couple other stories that caught my eye were about the Northern Lights. Now this story is about whistling at the Northern Lights, and it may seem kind of silly or simple, but it's actually quite serious. Like, the more I read into it, the more you're basically just not supposed to whistle at night ever. Because apparently whistling at night invites spirits into your home. You're basically inviting them in. And that might even be where the superstition from the Northern Lights came from. So apparently when you whistle at the Northern Lights, they're supposed to take your soul. Inuit legend says that Northern Lights were torches held by their ancestors to help light the way for the dead to pass on. It's said that if you whistle at night at the Northern Lights, the spirits will come down and they'll steal your soul away. Most people believe that this legend was made up to keep kids from playing at night too late, and from the other dangers that are associated with being out at night, like any animals or accidents that could happen. But there's also another version of this story, which is like a happier version, is that the Northern Lights are actually dancing, and when you whistle at them, they're supposed to dance more. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not really sure if I'd risk it after hearing the first story now. But would you guys? Would you whistle at the Northern Lights? I don't know if I would. But that's all I have for this episode of Myths and Monsters. These were just two stories that caught my eye initially. I am doing a bit more research, hoping to find closer places that I can travel to and actually show you guys some footage of the actual location. I think that would be really interesting. But yeah, let me know down below if you have any like interesting monster or ghost stories, and I might feature them on here. But yeah, I hope this didn't scare you too much, and I'll see you in the next episode, guys.